Good morning, everyone. I'm Wes here in the Rabbi Samuel Chill Sanctuary. I'm here with my beloved colleagues, David Beckman and Caitlin Bolina. And David and Caitlin, thank you so much for making this online connection possible. Want to thank Ruth Kaplan of the Consul General's office for helping to set this up. And want to thank Consul General Meron Reuben for being here. He prefers to be called Meron, so we will accede to his request. Meron, we're so grateful to you to be here. The initial purpose of this is just to have Meron introduce himself to our community, to get a chance to hear from and meet some members of Temple Emanuel. We could get a chance to hear from and meet him, and that we're going to do. The first part of our hour together, he just kind of shared his story. But then it turns out that this conversation is well timed. There's so much energy going on with Israel and with Israel in America. As you all know, there's an election next month, the fourth election in the recent period. There's a lot of news about the coronavirus in Israel, the Haredi community. That was cover story last week. There's a lot of news about the president and why did he wait a month? He waited a month. Why did he wait a month and how did that go? Different reports on that. There's a lot of news about the nuclear deal and how this administration has a different policy than the previous administration. What does that mean? So the purpose of our conversation is to hear an introduction from Meron about his life, what brought him here, and then really to have a conversation with our new Consul General about our beloved Eretz Israel. So Meron, take it away, and thank you so much for being here.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Boker Tov. And I'd like to begin by thanking Rabbi Gordon Schwartz for his gracious invitation to speak with all of you this morning. It is really a pleasure. Unfortunately, it is virtual, as most of my meetings have been since I arrived here just more than 2 months ago, meeting everybody on Zoom in quadrangles or in squares. It depends how one puts the Zoom on. So it really is a pleasure. I was very happy to meet previously the rabbi and also Rabbis Robinson and Berger, as well as Cantor Rosenberg. And one day in the not too distant future, I hope that I'll be able to meet everybody, maybe outdoors and then indoors in the really not too distant future. First and foremost, I'd really like to state that for Israel, the American Jewish community is really, really important, and continuing our good ties and deepening them ever more is something that is a necessity for the continuity both of the state of Israel and for the Jewish people. We have a very similar value system, respect for human dignity, social justice, and I really hope that this morning we will be able to have a fruitful discussion between us. As you can fathom, I am not Israeli by birth. My accent is a mix of South African and British English. I was born in Cape Town in South Africa. I moved with my mother at the age of 9 to London before making Aliyah just before my bar mitzvah in 1974 at the age of 12. After high school, I served as an air traffic controller in the Israeli Air Force. Then, like a lot of Israelis, put on a backpack and went around the world, enjoying myself and the freedom after army service. Came back to study international relations and Middle East studies at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and then was accepted into the Cadet Corps of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1988. So a quick addition makes my service in the foreign ministry more than 3 decades at 33 years. And even though I applied to go to China, I was sent to, well, they nearly got the letters right, shall I say. Instead of sending me to CHINA, I ended up in CHILE. So I can always say that 3/5 of my request was answered. So going off to Chile changed my personal life and my career. I served in 5 Latin American destinations: in Chile, in Mexico. I was Israeli ambassador to Paraguay and Israeli ambassador to Bolivia. Actually, the last serving Israeli ambassador to Bolivia, because we still have not reopened in La Paz, and ambassador to Colombia. And then at the end of my 3rd year in Colombia, I received a call and was asked to take up the position of Israel's ambassador to the United Nations in 2010. I enjoyed a year sitting on Abba Eben's chair in our embassy to the United Nations in New York. It was a real honor, and especially for somebody who, well, I'm definitely not comparing myself to Abba Eben, but we were both born in South Africa, and it was a wonderful feeling being able to sit in at his desk, on his chair. It hasn't been changed, by the way. The office still remains with the antique furniture from the 1950s. It really was a special experience being in the United Nations. I came back to Israel, and from the 5 years preceding my arrival in New England, I was Israel's Chief of State Protocol, responsible, amongst other things, for all the visiting world dignitaries, and had the enjoyment of meeting world leaders behind the scenes and seeing things that maybe other people prefer not to put into the spotlight. Before leaving, I was also privy to some historic visits, especially from the United Arab Emirates, the first ministerial visit, which was received at Ben Gurion Airport by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and also be involved in a small way in our normalization agreements that have been ongoing for the last 6-7 months with 4 countries, as you know, from the Middle East and North Africa. That is the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. I am also very happy to say that I am a proud father of 2 young ladies in their 20s. My eldest, Chen, is studying 2nd year art at Bezalel Arts Academy in Jerusalem. And my youngest daughter, Liad, is in a combat unit, an intelligence combat unit on the southern border in Israel. And I'm here in Israel with my partner, David, and slowly getting used to the snow and the ice of a Bostonian winter. We have added a lovely little puppy to our family, so he takes us out in the snow or the ice early in the morning. So I am getting a feel of trudging through the snow. As I mentioned before, it's not always easy to start a diplomatic post wherever you are, but it's even more difficult during Corona because we cannot do what most diplomats like to do, and that is press the flesh. Not only politicians do it, we diplomats also feel that it's an imperative part of our life to meet people and to make personal contacts. And this is what is so important to our job. And like you, we all crave this human connection that hopefully, as I said, we will experience in the not too distant future. Many people have asked me, what do I want to achieve in New England when I get here? And I think the most important thing would be to share the true face of Israel behind the headlines. I would definitely feel that there is a necessity that people, not only in the Jewish community, but also outside it, of course, understand the diversity and the multiculturalism that characterizes Israel, the multiracialism that culture that focuses in on Israel. And that is something that unfortunately a lot of people don't know. And even members of the Jewish community sometimes don't always realize what is going on in Israel. I know those who go to Israel have a tendency to go back more than once, and so know it, but there is and there still is the vast majority of the Jewish population of the United States that does not know Israel personally. That is beginning to change with Birthright, and I think that is a wonderful program because it does open Israel up to the United States. In another way, unfortunately, I think the Israelis don't really understand at all the Jewish community in the United States. And so I really think that this interchange of experiences has to be done both through the American Jewish community and to Israel, and the Israeli community to the United States. I really would like to also deepen the dialogue and understanding between the different cultures, and of course understand more and more the broad spectrum of the Jewish community here in New England, which has a very, very good and solid background, and is made up of many different communities who seem to live much more in harmony than in other places in the United States. I'm also, of course, very with a need to focus in on the academic community. As you know, in New England, there are more than 250 centers of studies, both universities and colleges, that dot the landscape. And in the end, this is the place that brings out the American leadership. As the president of Harvard was telling me the other day, he said that 56 of the newly elected members of the 117th Congress are in fact Harvard graduates. And that just goes to show more than 10% of the population in the Congress is actually from one center of learning in this region. I also understand, and I know that in your temple there's a very, very high degree of engagement with Israel, and that there are varying perspectives as to what Israel is all about and what you are doing, and also the fact that it's always been a place that has invited and welcomed Israelis of all types to the community, and of course the rabbi's very strong connection to the Hartman Institute, where he used to go, because I hope that you'll be able to get back there this summer, because things do seem to be moving quite well in Israel with the rollout of vaccinations, but we'll deal with that a little bit later. And of course, all the connections that you have between the religious schools and the partnering of schools in Haifa, as well as the strong support of the CJP in the community for the Boston-Haifa connection. I really am excited to be able to to continue a tradition of consul generals speaking in the congregation, and I hope that what I have to say will be a little bit added to all the things that you are doing and learning from me a little bit about Israel, and also learning from you about what happens here. And of course, the opportunities of learning about Israel and including the Kraft family and Passport to Israel program, which enables the teens also to go to Israel. So we really are excited to promote this collaboration with you, and hope that you will be able to enjoy also some of the cultural things that we are doing lately in our with our consulate. We are at long last getting back onto the road of having a full team at the consulate. It's taking time, but we are getting there. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the rollout in Israel. It's always nice to see good articles and about Israel. We do like, and that's what we should strive to be, is Or Lagoyim, I presume. It is something that is very important, and I think in this rollout of the vaccines, we have proven that Israel can do it just as well, and if not better than quite a few countries. As you know, Israel gives vaccines to all the adult population, all the adult population over the age of 16. As of now, more than 4.5 million Israelis have received the first jab, and some 3 million have received the two vaccinations, which means that if you look at the adult population, we have already more than 50% of the adult population of the state of Israel has received two vaccinations, and this is a really important and a good focus of trying to get things back onto track in Israel. In fact, those who looked at or saw Israel's news today have seen that all the shopping malls and all the stores, as well as the gyms, the swimming pools, have reopened as of this morning in Israel. And this is something that is very, very important. Granted, it's not always easy, and the pandemic is far from over, either in Israel or elsewhere around the world. As you know, there are many variants that are popping up all over the place, whether it be the British variant or the South African variant or the Brazilian variant. And now I've heard lately there's a new Ugandan variant, which is also will cause a major problem in the future. But there are positive developments that are coming out of Israel. For example, just last week, there was, maybe in the United States, I can't say last week because Sunday isn't always the first day of the week, but last week, according to us Israelis, we had a very promising, anti-COVID nasal spray that is called XOCD24, and this has been developed in Ichilov Medical Hospital. It still, of course, has to go through a lot of severe testing, but it has proven that of the 29 cases that received this nasal spray, 29 of the 30 people who received the spray and had moderate to severe cases of COVID left the hospital within 3 to 6 days. So that was really something that was quite interesting. And the Brazilians have shown a lot of interest in this nasal spray and are wanting to, even though it hasn't finished all the tests, wants to already use it for the population. We are, of course, known as the startup nation, though sometimes we ourselves need to improve on the way we divide things and use things and give things out, computerized, etc. But things do work in a relatively a good fashion in Israel. And I think we're also a social impact nation. And here we need to address our own internal challenges, those socially and those of economic inequality. We are definitely not a perfect country. We strive to improve ourselves, and we will continue to strive and do our best so that the Zionist project of the State of Israel will continue until it definitely is a light unto nations. There are both the government and I think hundreds of NGOs are working, I think, to try and address these social inequities. Lately, I don't know if you've seen, there have been more arrivals in Israel of the Falashmora, a group of Ethiopian Jews who remained in Ethiopia, mainly in Addis Ababa, for many years, and I'm very happy to say that this is now taking place. It is very emotional because some of the families have not been together for many a year. And there have been some very emotional and wonderful scenes. As you know, our Minister of Immigrant Absorption is herself an immigrant from Ethiopia. The first Ethiopian minister that Israel has, or of Ethiopian origin, and she also is doing her best to bring to bring to an end the division of the Jewish community between Israel and Ethiopia, and bring them to live in Israel. The government understands the inequities and the problems that exist in the society, and we are trying to improve the funding, both in the Arab sector and also to improve the economic and social lives of all minorities. And I think the results are quite impressive. It always reminds me of a trip I made before COVID when I went to Crete, and I decided against my better judgment to take a tour in Hebrew of the island. And I was pleasantly surprised about the tour guide, and I was even more surprised to find that we were the only Jewish group on the bus. All the other people taking the tour in Crete on an Israeli Hebrew tour of the island were from different Arab communities dotted around Israel, which I found exceedingly interesting. And I ended up having a wonderful time and a wonderful tour, realizing that Israeli society is actually going in ways and that maybe none of us ever thought before, and that the Arab minority and the Arab-speaking minority of Israel actually feel much more at home in a surrounding that speaks Hebrew than any other surroundings. And this is something that is really quite impressive. As mentioned before, I know that a lot of you are also involved with the Ethiopian community in Haifa through Shiluvim and the Netavim programs, and I salute you for that. And I would like to thank you for showing and being involved. And this is something that we are really happy with. As I said, we try not to shy away from our problems. And in the spirit of Tikkun Olam, we do try to fix our society. And I hope that one would be able to enjoy and improve and expand the opportunities for all of our peoples and all of the communities. And I think I'd like to stop here and say and end maybe my talk and open up to questions and on the inspiring words of the late Martin Luther King, whose birthday we all recently marked. And he said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And I definitely hope that that is the way that we are going. And I think together we can take that road.
Meron, thank you so much for your warm and thoughtful, generous introduction. What I'd like to do now is, Meron, I'm going to ask you a few questions just to get the ball rolling. And I want to invite, I think we have something like 161 screens. And I wanted to invite anyone who wishes to ask Meron a question to just put it in the Temple Emanuel chat. And my colleague, Caitlin, will read it. So feel free to do that. Please make your questions short. So I'm going to start, Meron, with a few questions. First, the call from the president to the prime minister took a month, and then there was a lot of drama about the call, and then some mixed results about how did it go. Could you tell us about the call from President Biden to Prime Minister Netanyahu and your sense of the timing and the content and the consequence of it all?
Well, I unfortunately wasn't privy to the call itself. I didn't listen in. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall, of course. Yes, it is true that it took a little bit longer, but if you look at the amount of calls that that President Biden has made around the world, it has been to major countries like Russia, China, etc. And Israel. Granted, we see ourselves, and I think the United States also sees itself as a true and trusted ally of the United States, is also, I think, in that group. I don't have a list of how many calls were made, but it's definitely within the first 15 calls that President Biden has made, and it was the first call to any of the leaders of the Middle East. I think that Israel, like in okay, no, I was.
Meron, can you? We lost you for a minute. You said after you said that it was one of the first calls to the leaders of the Middle East, we lost you. So if you could pick up from there.
It was the first call to any leader in the Middle East. And I think that goes to show the importance that Israel does have, and the impressive alliance that we have, and the fact that we are definitely a steadfast ally of the United States, and the United States a steadfast ally of us. I think the unfortunate tweet by our previous ambassador to the United Nations that was not coordinated with anybody was, as I said, an unfortunate tweet. I think had it not been sent out into cyberspace, we wouldn't be having the question about why it took him more than X amount of days to get to speak to some of the world leaders that are in the world. President Biden and the new administration is in the middle of a pandemic. like the rest of the world, that is what has to be dealt with first, and that is quite understandable as to why specific things are not being dealt with. Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense have all spoken to their counterparts in Israel, and we do understand that the president has a country to run, and he has promised quite a few things in the first 100 days of his presidency. So he's got a lot of things to do, and we do understand the focus that has to be and will be in what is going on in the United States.
Meron, thank you. Could we just a quick follow-up on that? What are your thoughts about the Iranian nuclear deal, which, there's a lot of energy around that and the difference between this administration and the previous administration. Talk to us about how we might think about the Iranian nuclear deal today.
Well, here I think our lines are very, very clear. We definitely have said, and we will continue to say, that 2016 is definitely not 2021. We are committed, and we will continue to be committed to preventing Israel from getting nuclear weapons. And our position on the nuclear agreement hasn't changed. We don't like it. And we didn't like it in 2016, and in 2021 we still don't like it because so many things have changed. We believe that going back to the old agreement will only pave Iran's way to a nuclear arsenal, and you can see that by the files that were taken from Tehran in the last few years. That the Israeli intelligence, I think some of you would remember it, managed to bring back millions of files from all over, from Tehran. And even though we are still going through the documents, it's definitely, the files have proved that Iran lied and continues to lie about its nuclear ambitions, about its nuclear program. It's not a democratic regime. It's a theocratic, brutal regime. It supports terror around the Middle East and around the world. And we are definitely not interested in seeing them run rings around the rest of the world and continue to get the Iranian or running towards an Iranian nuclear bomb. But Israel is in close contact with the United States on the matter and will continue to be in close contact. We definitely think that is the way to go, and to continue the dialogue with the United States about the Iranian deal.
Thank you, Meron. With that, I'm going to start asking some questions that have come into the chat. What's the status of Africans in South Tel Aviv?
In what way? First and foremost, Israel has vaccinated even all the illegal aliens that are in Israel. So we also, by the way, vaccinated the diplomatic corps to Israel, and a lot of the diplomatic corps were some of the first members of their countries ever to receive the vaccinations. We are also flying in our diplomatic community into Israel to get the vaccination. I do have the ability to fly into Israel, but I'm reaching the limit where I can actually apply for the vaccination, and I do have 2 symptoms that will allow me to put my name down onto the list to get it in Massachusetts. So I most probably won't be flying to Israel for a vaccination, hoping to get it here in the coming weeks. But back to the question that was asked. I don't really understand exactly what is meant when you talk about the Africans in South Tel
Well,
Aviv.
I think I mean, I didn't ask the question, but I'll do a Rashi on the question.
Okay.
I believe that perhaps what the questioner was thinking about is that there are folks from Eritrea, in others countries in South Tel Aviv, which is a famously challenging area. Um, I don't quite know how many, 30,000, 40,000, et cetera. And the question really is, how are they doing, and how is the government of Israel today thinking about 30, 40,000 people who are from Africa, from Eritrea, from other countries, North Eritrea? How are they thinking about it, and what will be with them? How will that story end? I think that's the question.
I don't know. We see them as economic migrants who have come for a better life. Granted, in the times that they have had problems in Eritrea, and it's actually, as chief of state protocol, I had to deal through the police, especially on Eritrean Independence Day. There would be scuffles and even violent fights between pro-Eritrean groups, pro-Eritrean government groups, and anti-Eritrean government groups in Israel, actually. And the police are definitely, it's one of the days that the Israeli police come out in force and make sure that the scuffles don't turn deadly. But yes, we definitely looked upon the signing of the peace accord between Eritrea and Ethiopia very favorably, hoping that this would slightly change the situation. Also, the fact that the fighting in Darfur, because a lot of the Africans are not only from Eritrea, but also from Darfur and from Sudan, and the fact that we now have diplomatic relations with Sudan and recognition, this should definitely change the atmosphere and allow the Sudanese to head back to their country. A lot of the migrants have been in Israel for some time because they crossed mainly the Egyptian border into Israel when we didn't have a strong barricade between ourselves and Egypt. This now exists, and so economic migrants are finding it much more difficult to get into Israel. They are trying to come through the Jordanian border, and some even try and come through the Lebanese and the Syrian border. But yes, we do understand. We would hope that in the end, those who have managed to join Israeli society will remain, and others will, in the end, find a way to get back to their societies.
Okay, Meron, thank you for that. Here's the next question on the chat. I'm just reading the question. Could you be more specific about the initiatives and programs that Israel is doing to promote economic and social equities between under-resourced groups in Israel?
Well, I'm not a member of the Ministry of Interior, or Ministry of Education, or Ministry of Health, etc. But yes, we are going to. There are so many programs that are on the books that whether it is increased university enrollment, whether it is improving the funds that are given to the different municipalities around Israel. Over the decades, there has been an imbalance of focusing in on infrastructure in specific areas and in specific places around Israel. And as Israel becomes a more affluent country, we do have the abilities to put in more money into areas that were previously not dealt with. But, and here I have to remind everybody, Israel does have a very high cost of security. Had Israel not have to pay for its security, I think that, or added security, I think that Israel would look much more like a North European social democratic country than it actually is, because we put out a very, very high percentage of our um, budget to defense. And this doesn't really exist in any other country. After Israel, I think the United States is the second, the country number 2 on the list, which puts money into its defense. Of course, some of the countries like China and Russia don't really publicize how much money they put into their defense, but when it comes to that, Israel unfortunately doesn't always have the loose change to put into all the social projects that we are trying to do it. But I think those of you who have gone have visited Israel more than once and have seen the changes that are in Israel, I think there would definitely be you would be able to see that things are moving in the right direction. And I think that this is something that is very, very important for us as a society. Healthcare, as you know, is universal in Israel. I think that that is very important. The moment you have a healthy society, in the end, it costs less. The upkeep of a healthy society is much less than an unhealthy society. And so that's part of the abilities of our rollout, that we have digitalized medicine, and this digitalized medicine is in all areas. Granted, the hospitals are better in the major cities, and it's a little bit less better in the periphery, as we call it. But I think that things are changing there as well, because slowly but surely the railway lines are getting to further afield. And I think that also the building of new hospitals and clinics and trying to get doctors to do their work away from the center of the country and things like this are slowly but surely changing the way Israel's minorities and Israel's periphery is living. I think this is something. I mean, I can try and go and see what different kinds of programs there are, but there are thousands of them, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you, Meron. Our next question is, what would be helpful for members of Temple Emanuel, clergy, and all of our congregation to do to better support Israel today in 2021?
Well, first and foremost, we thank you for all the support that we receive and have received up till today. I think that it's not always easy, because there are all different angles on how to help, where to help, and what to do. I think that that the more people that understand Israel and get to see its vibrant society, the better. I think that is first and foremost is to speak out of knowledge. So the important thing is for yourselves first to get to Israel and see it on a first-hand basis. And secondly, I would definitely hope that one would be able to, by understanding Israel more, you can explain Israel better to anybody who has doubts about it. And I think that is something that is the major focus. You already have some very excellent programs that you are doing, and that is, I suggest that they be continued. That would actually be very good. I presume that on the political side, understanding the importance and the bipartisan importance of Israel to the United States. The fact that Israel is an ally, Israel is not an ally of one party or the other. I think if you look into American history, you will see that there has been a pendulum that has been swinging between the parties, depending on the different decades. If we go back 30, 40 years ago, not many Republicans were very pro-Israel, and Israel was a very democratic issue or Democratic Party issue. I think now some people see Israel as more a Republican issue, which I think is nonsense. Israel is definitely a bipartisan subject. Israel, without doubt, is an ally of the United States. We're not an ally of a particular political party in the United States. And that is where we see the importance to explain to all the new politicians, and you've got a lot of new politicians, where we are, what we are doing, and how we are doing it. And I think that the more and more people, for example, we just sent to members of the local congresses and senators here, trees that we planted in Akko, in urban areas, showing the importance that Israel has on climate change. There are things that sort of never come out in the discourse about what is going on. Actually, the major news to come out of Israel over the last 2 days is this terrible ecological disaster that we have now on our shores, because we haven't yet found the culprit, but a ship unfortunately offloaded tar and petrol in the Eastern Mediterranean, and it has devastated some of our shores. Tens of kilometers of Israel's shores, which is going to take a long time, especially the animal life along the shore to recuperate, as well as cleaning up that is going on. So apart from the fact that Israel is opening up today, yesterday and today is still focused by this ecological disaster that has hit Israel, and it's one of the worst ecological disasters. I don't think, somebody asked if the offloading of the tar was a terrorist activity. I hope it wasn't. I mean, we have seen ecological terror in the past. 20 years ago, the Palestinians burnt a lot of Israel's forests intentionally. I don't know if you remember, but more than 6 million trees in and around Jerusalem were burnt in that period, and it was unfortunately ecological terrorism. I presume that things will have to be checked and see where it goes, but the most important now is that the cleanup continue.
Meron, thank you. Next question kind of builds on some of the timber of your remarks previously about politics and complex politics. I'm just going to quote the question and ask you to comment. Can you help us understand the varying views in Israel regarding its feelings about the Trump experience and how this will impact things going forward?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Israel and the Philippines were the two countries that had a majority of Trump supporters before the 2020 elections, if you asked in a poll. In many ways, the Trump administration did help further things in the relationship between Israel and the United States, and that we are not denying. I think that the previous administration also left something that was surprisingly good, and it's one of the things that this administration has already said that it would like to continue, and that is the Abraham Accords. That is the fact that normalization is becoming a major focus, and the Arabs, or quite a few Arab states, are willing to say now in public what they've been saying in private for many decades, is that the major problem is that the Palestinians are not willing to move on peace. But not only that, they are trying to take away the Palestinian equation when dealing with Israel. And I think that is something very, very important. We would love to reach an agreement with the Palestinians, and it is the Palestinians who have to come and talk without preconditions. Whether we like it or not, Mr. Abu Mazen is into his 17th year of a 4-year period. I mean, we try and remember when last there were elections in the Palestinian Authority. He has called for elections now in May, and the elections for president maybe in June. We'll see if this actually takes place. But the leadership on the Palestinian side has been very steadfast in its objections and has not, unfortunately, put forward any real ideas of moving forward. So if we, I think that what surprised a lot of people was that by moving the American embassy to Jerusalem, and turning the American embassy in Tel Aviv to a branch of the American embassy in Jerusalem. I don't know if anybody know that, but if you go past the building in Tel Aviv, it now, of course, says a branch of the American embassy in Jerusalem. That, of course, is for, well, we'll go into that another time. I won't go out. The fact that we now have 4 normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Sudan, and with Morocco. The fact that the Moroccans have reopened their embassy in a building that in Tel Aviv. Well, they will have to redo it, of course. As once again, as Chief of State Protocol, for example, the Moroccans steadfastly paid their municipal dues, both for the building that they own in North Tel Aviv and for the house of their ambassador in Savion, and have never missed a payment. So it's actually impressive that even though Morocco had some 20 years ago had an office in Tel Aviv, and office building actually, and a house for the head of mission, they continued to keep that. And the same thing now. You can see there seems to be quite a nice love affair between the new ambassador of the United Arab Emirates, and he's even tweeting in Hebrew. I don't know if anybody has seen that. And he seems to be doing exceedingly well in that. And the Bahrainis are also going to be opening up their embassy in the not too distant future. So these are things that I think that by shaking up the Israeli-Palestinian impasse, by trying to go around it, I think that the previous administration has actually done something that many administrations before it didn't do, and that is to move the process forward and to look for a different path to take it. I think that the Palestinians are beginning to understand that maybe they should also start looking for another path to reaching an agreement. In some ways, I think the Palestinians have also seen it as it's very nice, you know. They when Yasser Arafat was very close to a full agreement and independence on or some kind of definite two-state solution, it was not in the end reached, because it was like Arafat had reached his Rubicon and was not willing to cross the river from a terrorist leader to a political statesman. And I think that unfortunately the Palestinians have sort of remained mired in their position, whereby it might be even nicer to remain on the world stage as something that is not yet a full state, and at the same time get sympathy from all the rest of the world because they're not marching towards themselves to some kind of independence. Because I think that they might sort of be off the world stage if they did become independent.
Meron, thank you. Two last questions. One builds from a question that's in the chat, and the other I'll take the prerogative and ask the last question. The penultimate question has to do with the ultra-Orthodox or the Haredi community. I'm sure you saw the front page article in the Times last week about coronavirus and Haredis, etc. Can you talk to us about the status of Haredi Israel, coronavirus on Haredi Israel, and relations between Haredis and non-Haredis in Israel today?
Well, unfortunately, the coronavirus has been quite devastating for the Haredi population in Israel, but it's very, very difficult to put them all into one box. Like every community, they have lots of different parts of the community, and the vast majority of the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, which is growing continuously, is very, it's the vast majority have actually adhered to the rules and regulations. But it is the fringes which, when they have a wedding or when they do throw rocks and riot, etc., and block roads, they are the minority in the end. But what has happened during the coronavirus, I think, has thrown the spotlight onto the Haredi community in a way that I don't think everybody is so happy with. It is something that Israel is dealing with in its dealings with minorities, and the Haredi community is a fast-growing minority because it has a tendency to focus on their involvement in the social fabric of the state of Israel. Because as the minority groups grow, both the Haredim and the Arabs, they are becoming a larger and larger percentage of Israel, and they will have to pull their weight in the end in a society that, unfortunately, some 70% of the men of the Haredim do not work. They live off stipends, but you are seeing a major change in the Haredi women society, where a lot of Haredi women are moving into high tech, believe it or not. First of all, it's very good because it's something that you can speak to somebody on the telephone for, and you don't need to meet men or in the workplace, etc. So there are a lot of very major changes that are beginning to take place. And this is actually being led by the Haredim, the women in the Haredi society, who are becoming the breadwinners of their families. And this is something that is fascinating to watch. We're actually seeing this happen, and it's an undercurrent inside the society. This, of course, as I said, it's brought onto the stage the relationship between an insular community that thought it could continue living like a state within a state. But as this state within a state gets larger and larger, the contact that it has with the outside society is, of course, getting larger and larger. And I think also the American Haredi community here also does have a role, and is playing a role, because here in America, the Haredim work. It's not like in Israel where the majority of the men in the Haredi community don't work. So this is something that is also beginning to, as American Haredi immigration improves or grows in Israel, this is also bringing it's the tip of the iceberg that we're going to have to deal with. I think it's very important that we are beginning to deal with it. it's got, of course, pluses and it's got minuses, but they have suffered terribly through COVID. They are a small community, and yet some 25% of the deaths in Israel are from the Haredi community, and they are, we're talking about 6 to 8% of the population. So yes, it has been devastating for them.
Meron, thank you for the deep humanity of your answer there. Last question, and then we'll let you go. There's going to be an election in Israel next month. Talk to us about that. Talk to us about the election in March.
Election number 4 in the last 2 years. Yes, I think it's very exciting. I think it shows the problems that Israel is facing in its electoral system. I used to always find it difficult to understand how the Americans have a continual electioneering cycle that never ends, because you have elections every 2 years, and now here we are having elections every 6 months. Yes, it is very interesting that we cannot find a stable government, but that is the will of the people and the Israeli system. As you know, in the 72, nearly 73 years of Israel's independence, we have never had one-party government in the state of Israel. We've always had coalitions. No party has ever won a majority of seats. I think that will make it easier to explain why in your community you also never have one idea, because us Jews have a tendency to splinter on practically every single subject. I think that Israel is in a transition period. Prime Minister Netanyahu has done an excellent job over the last 14 years. He's even surpassed Ben-Gurion as Israel's longest serving prime minister. And he is definitely a world leader, whether you support him or you're amongst his detractors. He definitely knows how to lead, and he definitely knows how to speak, and he definitely knows how to swim in the different political currents that exist in the state of Israel, and he swims very successfully in those currents. We will have to see. If the polls are correct, and we are a month away from the elections, we will be going to the ballot box on the 23rd of March. But if the polls are correct, we might still have yet another hung parliament, which might take us to election number 5. But let's finish election number 4, see where that gets us, and then we'll talk about the future. But yes, there is a lot of polarization, but at the same time, in this polarization, it seems to be more an issue of persona than politics.
Well, Meron, I want to end with a round of thank yous. First of all, I want to thank the many folks from our community who have joined us this morning. We're so grateful for your hour to connect with the Consul General. Again, I want to thank Caitlin Belina and David Beckman for making the connectivity possible. Ruth Kaplan, I want to thank you for making the introduction. And Consul General Reuben, we've just loved getting a chance to begin an introduction to you. And I want to end by saying amen to your prayer. May we meet in person together soon. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi, and Chag Sameach for Purim to everybody as well.
Amen. Chag Purim Sameach. Bye-bye.